Demographers at the United Nations Population Division set October 31, 2011 as the symbolic date for the world's population hitting the 7 billion mark. Today alone, 382,000 babies were born. The UN projects that the Earth's population will reach the 8 billion mark in about 14 years' time. Joining us now on the challenges and prospects facing business strategy is Dr. Grant Hatch. He's Director of Strategy at Accenture. When we read and we look at those numbers, they appear frightening. In fact, when I was preparing for this interview, one of the stories that I came across came from the United Nations Population Fund, and they were talking about how Africa's economic growth has not been able to keep up with the population growth. And yet some people say Africa, in fact, is the future, and the growth and the expansion that we've seen is in middle class presents a huge opportunity. Where do you sit on that debate?
Well, Godfrey, I think that's absolutely right. I think if you look at Africa's population, around 1 billion, and given the rate at which the world's population is growing, you know, by 2050, there are going to be 2 billion people in Africa. So it's an enormous population growth. But I think what's really interesting is that population is, you know, increasingly younger. So relative to other markets, you've got, you know, 2/3 of the people are in the sort of young category. You've got poverty declining, and you've got large numbers of people, as you said, you know, moving into the middle class. So, you know, moving from poverty, what we call rising strivers, in terms of, you know, up into that level, and actually earning more and starting to actually, you know, demand greater, you know, access to consumer products.
Yeah. So the argument you're presenting is that the numbers that we've seen and the job opportunities that are being created are more than making up for the rapid population growth. Because I think the population growth numbers that I saw suggest that Africa's population is growing at the rate of about 3.2% or 3% thereabouts per year.
Yeah, so the question is, you know, is consumer spending growing at a greater rate than that?
Yeah,
I think it is.
And what is the answer to that?
Well, it is. I mean, if you look at it, you know, total consumer spending for sort of sub-Saharan Africa was around sort of, you know, $600 million. It's now going to rise to about $1 trillion. So you're seeing a rapid rise in consumer spending, and it's really coupled to that trend that we're seeing in terms of, you know, greater numbers of consumers moving from below the poverty line to actually earning enough that they start actually aspiring to and actually buying, you know, more sophisticated products.
Yeah.
I mean, in the context of today being the sort of 7th billion human on the planet, I think it's the question one has to ask is, you know, can Africa's environment sustain that rate of growth? And so that's a very pertinent question on a day like today of, you know, can Africa, you know, sustain the kind of development that it's going to require in terms of infrastructure?
I want to reverse that question and ask it of you. Can it?
Well, I think it can, provided there's certain things that take place. So if you look, if you look over that period, urbanization is going to go from sort of 40% to, you know, over 60%. So the question is what government policies and infrastructure is going to be developed to facilitate that, or are we going to see just large extensions and sort of low-income housing, you know, occur across the continent? Yeah. And the other, and I think the other question is, can agriculture's, you know, physical environment provide the water and the food to feed those people? And our answer is, I think it can, but it's got to be managed very carefully. You know, uncontrolled development will damage that environment and limit the potential to get to those numbers. Yeah.
Now, the danger, of course, when people talk about Africa is they talk about it like it's one homogeneous you know, entity. And yet we do know that Africa is 54 nations. And in fact, we're talking about 1,500 languages. And so it's a very different mix. Now, in terms of the government policies to deal with those, maybe we need to speak broadly and say, where in the regions of Africa are we seeing the appropriate policies being pursued, and where are their problems?
Yeah. Look, I think that you're absolutely right. I think there's a tendency to see Africa as kind of 1 billion people, one continent, but it's not. It's, as you said,
I'd love it if it were one continent.
It's actually very diverse in terms of language, religion, you know, background. And so because of that, you've got multiple markets, and even within countries, you've got, you know, multiple cities that are different markets, you know, and that makes for the sort of mosaic that Africa is an interesting place.
Sure.
But your question around, you know, where we're seeing the development, I mean, you've obviously got the southern Africa, which we're all familiar with, the SADC development around South Africa, but development also occurring in sort of East and West Africa, you know, the east side around, you know, we've just seen Kenya on the news, you know, Kenya, you know, Uganda, sort of Ethiopia, Tanzania, that hub growing extensively. Yeah. And on the west side, centered on Nigeria, Ghana, you know, Senegal. Yeah. The key issue is, you know, are those going to develop as, you know, individual markets, or are we going to see greater cross-border trading, you know, a breakdown in the sort of broader barriers that have been in the past? And we are seeing that. So I think one of the big facilitators to that growth is going to be increasing effort to try and create, you know, sort of these free trade areas.
Yeah, and I think we can say also reasonably that compartmentalization, if you like, and that regionalization, if you like, has been pursued through the regional trade blocks that we've seen emerging out of those out of those countries.
Absolutely, and that's helping quite a lot. The question is, there needs to be an acceleration in the rate of cross-border trade and facilitating that trade.
And integration. Is it happening fast enough, do you think?
No, look, it's certainly a lot better than it was. I mean,
right.
I think it's coupled to, again, not a good timing to talk about, Kenya and Somalia disagreeing at the moment, but, it's linked to a decline in conflicts in Africa. And so it's made it a lot easier that governments are able to reach these agreements and actually work more closely. But
right.
I think it needs to happen at a faster pace.
So what does business do then in this environment? How does business approach this diverse continent that we've just described in such eloquent detail?
Look, I think companies are following different approaches. There's a tendency to believe that South Africa is the kind of gateway to Africa.
To Africa, actually, yes.
Many multinationals have entered Africa east, west. They've chosen. So the first question you've got to answer is, what is your country strategy? Where are you going to go to in Africa? Are you going to choose the east side and go to Kenya because it's English speaking and it's easier to enter? Are you going to choose, Nigeria? That's the first thing we've got to answer. And then having decided that is, which cities are you going to target? Are you going to go to Lagos in Nigeria, or are you going to target Accra in Ghana? Those are quite big questions that companies have got to answer. And it's driven by understanding where the consumers are. Now, what's really interesting, and that's what we try to highlight in some of the research you quoted, is getting access to the data isn't a simple case of going to Stats SA and looking for demographic data.
True.
You've got to gather a lot of that data, walking through markets, going to visit markets, visiting distributors, talking to people, and you've got to build it bottom up anecdotally and build a qualitative model of what that market looks like.
Yeah.
And then understand it in detail.
Absolutely. And the good story is that that data is becoming available now, and thanks to people like you who are putting in the hard work, we're beginning to see the numbers coming out, and everybody now is talking about Africa's consumer. But I will have to leave it there. Grant Hedge, Accenture Director of Strategy, Business Strategies for Africa. Thank you very much indeed for chatting to us today.